Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and our esteemed panelists. And thank you for all of you who, despite maybe being tired or hungry, are still with us this evening. We'll try to make it very interesting. So, climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is a reality. It is verily disrupting our economies, our ecosystems, and our way of life. And myself, coming from a small island developing state called Mauritius, a small island in the Indian Ocean, we are verily threatened. And as I said earlier, it is a reality. We either need to adapt or we perish. So, in line with the very essence of this dialogue, which is Sagar Manthan, meaning the churning of the ocean, to be able to bring out the most valuable treasures. Today, we shall explore how the challenges, the knowledge, the efforts, and even the obstacles can ultimately lead to positive results, and whether we should act together is no longer the question. How we should do it and when is the question. So for a long time, coastal communities have been at the forefront, especially when we talk about climate change. And as I mentioned earlier, for Mauritius, we have a rising sea level and global warming, which affects the coastal reef, the wildlife, and even our sustainability. So coming now to our esteemed panelists, whom I'm honored to be part of today, we have with us Mrs. Jodie Kunch, who is the Chief Executive of Moana Nui from New Zealand. We have Mr. Fatafehi Whakafanua, who is the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Tonga, the Chairman of the Environmental and Climate Change Committee, and also the youngest ocean elder. We have also Mr. Pierangelo Campodonico, who is the Director of the Museums of the Sea and Migration Institution, of the National Museum of the Italian Immigration, and the Vice President of the Association of Maritime Museums of the Mediterranean from Italy. And we have Mr. Algis Latikas, who is the Director General of the Port of Klaipėda from Lithuania. And we have our last speaker, Mr. Deepak Shetty, who informed us that he will be joining us shortly. So without much delay, I'm eager to hear from our experts here who will bring the diverse perspectives to engage with you all in what I'm sure promises to be a very insightful conversation this evening. So without further delay, let's dive in. So, Jodie, coming to you. New Zealand. I've for a long time heard about the Maori community, who provides deep knowledge and understanding of the environment gained over the centuries. And they believe in what you call the interconnectedness of all ecosystems, from the mountains to the sea, reminding me of an African principle called Ubuntu, which means we are. I am because you are. So we are all interconnected. So how do you see those local communities' knowledge, experience, expertise, wisdom? How have they contributed to adaptation measures? And what can you tell us about this beautiful community and any other community from New Zealand who have been verily at the front line dealing with the urgent climate crisis? Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think first to point out that what we're seeing emerge in New Zealand's adaptation strategies is that adaptation is taking many forms in many places, with many types of leadership and knowledge systems being integrated into solving problems together. And I think that that reflects something that's not just happening in New Zealand, but around the world, where the different knowledge networks and ecosystems are playing a critical role in building resilience. And it's not just about resilience to or preparedness to natural disasters and sea level rise, but more than that. And so for us at Moana Nui, which Moana Nui is a blue economy cluster, and I can come back to clusters a little bit and talk about their role, particularly and some work we're doing with the Pacific Islands. But we bring together businesses and institutions across maritime sectors that share a very bold ambition. And that ambition is to grow their enterprises and our region, our community's blue economy, in ways that generate social and ecological resilience. And that's equal to the economic gains that they're searching for as businesses. And it comes back to one of the Maori worldviews, which is that when the natural world is healthy, so too shall we be healthy. And so for us in the blue economy, what we're thinking about is when the ocean is healthy, our community is healthy. And if our businesses are going to depend on those natural resources and those people to be successful, our resilience is going to depend on that resilience. And so there's a lot of work being done into the planning and preparedness for us as communities that bring together knowledge systems, businesses, community organizations, and individuals on all kinds of different levels. And it's how we coordinate that to amplify our efforts that I think is really unique. And so I wanted to talk about two really quick examples, but cut me off if I go too far. So one of the driving questions that we had asked about how communities can be co-creators in in climate adaptation planning. And one of the things that we have learned is that understanding our why and the priorities for our community have given us a lot of power, because without it, it's very hard to do two things. And the first is to generate a critical mass, which is what gives us buy-in and mobilization and resourcing. But it also gives us the opportunity to push back on things being done to us. So also when we think of small island developing countries, when we think of larger government systems, quite often we in communities are on the receiving end of that. And so we wanted to find ways to bring together our resourcing for our community to be able to set our own agenda. So in our community about 10 years ago, our Indigenous leaders came together and decided to establish a 500-year vision for our region. And it's an intergenerational plan. And it's to establish our why and shared priorities. The why for us has come down to being good ancestors, tupuna pono. And our shared priorities address all the elements of social, cultural, ecological, and economic resilience, because those are essential to our regional well-being and prosperity. And so for us, climate resilience is about the integration of all of that. But the approach, what was really important about that, is that it meant that we as businesses, community organizations, individuals, had the ability to coordinate efforts and amplify our results. And the process.
Thank you, Judy.
Yep, sorry.
I think it's very interesting, and if we have time, we'll come back to this.
Yep.
But if you allow me, I quickly move to Mr. Fata Fehi, Whakawhanua. So coming to Tonga, it seems that there are certain zones which are very vulnerable, and there are a lot of projects going on, for instance, in Tonga Tapu. So if we look at today how local communities can be embedded and become active co-creators of building a sustainable and resilient maritime strategy and climate adaptation, what are the things you would be willing to share about the Tonga experience and the way forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. And I just want to acknowledge the rest of our distinguished fellow delegates and panelists. And of course, to be part of the Great Ocean Dialogue, this is my first time here. So it's really an honor to be part of this conversation. To your question, I think really traditional knowledge informing climate change adaptation is pivotal today because of where we are in terms of where the globe is in our mitigation adaptation. Some people question whether the climate is changing, for us at the forefront, especially as smaller and developing states or large ocean states, we are experiencing it day to day. Evidently, in 2022, we had a major external event that impacted us. It was a big volcanic eruption where the shockwave circulated the Earth. I think maybe 6 times. It was heard from Alaska. It was heard from New Zealand. The wave reached the coast of Chile and also reached as far as Japan. And in the northern island of New Zealand, their marinas were affected by this wave. So when we talk about how our cultures and our indigenous people can adapt to that changing climate, it's important to note that in Tonga, we have a deficit of infrastructure. So before you can talk about our resiliency, we are already at a deficit. So we're not talking from zero. And when you put it that way, you look at our infrastructure needs, there is a deficit of about $1 billion over the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. So when you talk about resilient infrastructure and investment and the need to collaborate with our donor partners to create a more resilient infrastructure that can protect our future and our livelihoods, what we do have is our 3,000-year-old culture. And after the consecutive environmental impacts from natural disasters, what we experience is that we are a resilient culture. Our people are very resilient. They bounce back. The day after a volcanic eruption and tsunami, people were out there sweeping the roads because of all the ash fall and all that. So I think in terms of climate adaptation, a lot can be learned from the traditional knowledge that people have and their ability to be resilient in the face of climate change and external natural disasters. In terms of like the policies and how they can be shaped by traditional knowledge, what you'd notice from the coastal areas is that areas where mangroves were not cut down were more resilient and were more protected from the tsunami. And so traditional knowledge would say mangroves need to be planted for coastal resilience. And economic development or growth would say, no, we need to turn these into ports and wharfs and use them for tourism. So similarly, fish migration seasons and watching bird migrations can also inform people on food security and where they can find livelihoods in terms of artisanal fishing. There are customary knowledges on MPAs. There are areas that are restricted by culture that can now inform our policies on marine protected areas. So a lot of this traditional knowledge that was probably overlooked in the past is now starting to inform our policies on becoming more adaptive to the changing climate. My last example that I want to talk about is the traditional shape of our fale, which is what we call houses, are rounded. And what we're finding now with wind tunnel studies is that those traditional houses were more resilient than the modern style building. So now we're looking back at old architecture that was informed by thousands of years of climate.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Very insightful. So we see here how ancient wisdom is actually still very relevant. And speaking about architecture and our history, I now move to our third speaker, who has such a vast experience in history and preservation of ancient wisdom and being associated so closely with museums. So my questions to Mr. Pierangelo would be about Italy. So how, I would like to ask you, what roles then can Italy's strong civic and cultural heritage and institutions like museums, of which you're very closely part of, what are the roles in translating to the local maritime knowledge and to national climate strategies today, like modern day threats.
Thanks. Also, for me, is the first time in India, and I thank Orf for this invite to debate this important words of our present. Let's start from an effect. Over the last 25 years, the average temperature of the Mediterranean Sea has increased by almost 2 degrees Celsius. This means that during the summer, temperatures are increased and exceeded 30 degrees Celsius in the northern Mediterranean. So it's very different from the climate change from Indian Ocean. But for the Mediterranean, sea sick is a very disaster. And this is a font for many problems. The warmer sea has endangered biodiversity. Alien species, such as the blue crab, but not only, have entered in the Mediterranean, and they have no rivers capable of containing them and therefore multiply, endangering other species. Now, we are facing an unprecedented situation, and this is the part, because we have a long history, but this is different from the past. This is why even communities with the most ancient tradition of sustainable fishing are struggling. And so there are many questions for the present. What can we do? Coastal communities, fishing communities, and governments must agree to cooperate to fish less, fish better, and consume differently. In traditional fishing, all the catch was consumed. In Italian cuisine, for example, has developed special dishes, brodetto, zuppa di pesce, to consume all type of fish. But today, however, fishing is intensive. Only the most prized fish are sold at the market, and the rest is discarded. And so is very different from the past. So the mission of the museum from this situation is a return to the past, return at the consuming differently. We need to limit fishing, especially intensive and destructive fishing, such as trawling, which destroy the seabed. This is one of the mission important for the museum to the coastal communities.
Thank you so much for sharing the ancient wisdom. So moving on to Mr. Algis, I want to ask you about the vulnerability of the Baltic Sea coast. And I know it is also very subject to erosion, and we are looking forward to hear how the country adapted to it and how the communities lived and survived it, and what are the lessons you would like to share with all of us from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Tina. I see we are very similar. I represent country which less 3 million people and you less than 2 million. So we are very small, but I say very active in this one topic about when we are speaking about climate change, because we are here. You know, when you start to talk about climate change, I think that it starts from the first one time when the man found 2 stones and ignited the fire. And after that, he burned a fire, grass, and so on and so on. And now we are burning billions of barrels of oil, gas, and so on. So we have very big climate change. And when I look at this audience, I see many young people. And I want to say to you, and I want to convince you that communities, they have very big one voice, and you have to allow this voice to say that we have to prevent this climate change, and we have to do everything that to stop it. Really, everybody who attend maritime industry, shipboard trading, we are different. Shipping lines, they are different. Forwarders, they are different. Ports, as I represent port, we are different as well. And we are in quite, to say, difficult situation, because in port we have everything. We have vessels, we have cars, we have rail cars, we have a lot of things in a port. And as usually ports, they are inside the cities. Around of us, there is a lot of community. Our port is 12 kilometers length inside the city. From one side, it is national park. From another side, it's Natura 2000, where you can nothing to do. It's preserved by UNESCO. And from third one side is city. So we have to deal with communities very much. Answering to your question as well, Lithuania has only 100 kilometers of coastline. And it means that it is very, very expensive for us, this one. And what we are doing, we know and we understand that our activities as a port activities, when we dredging port, when we take outside the port a lot of soil, we do some impact on beaches as well. And beaches which are not very far from us, they are affected. And what we are doing now, in some cases, of course, after some investigations, when we dredging, when we cleaning, we find sand, pure sand, good one sand, and we are feeding those beaches with those sand. We make them bigger, and so on and so on. But I have to say that climate change again affected. We never had in Lithuania in summertime big windstorms and so on, but now we have. And after such things as well, there is impact on those things.
Thank you for the sharing. We also welcome with us Mr. Deepak Shetty now. And moving on to you. So we have been exploring how the traditional practices of coastal communities and the ancient wisdom, and such as even seasonal fishing cycles, storm preparedness, mangrove plantation, and even architecture, how the ancient wisdom has actually contributed to climate adaptation, and they were at the forefront. So coming to India, and in your role as advisor in the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network and being a former secretary to the government of India and the director of shipping, I would like to ask you about some cases of community-led adaptation measures for India. And if you can also give the audience some details about, for instance, the cyclone preparedness plan for Odisha and the mangrove restoration plan at Sundarban. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the outset, my deepest apologies for striding in so belatedly. I was moderating a panel in another venue at Goregaon. I just concluded that got delayed by almost an hour. I've headed straight from there. So I would seek your indulgence for this somewhat, uninitiated entry. Be that as it may, I'm happy to delve into the question that you posed. In terms of, let me first address the disaster management preparation. The disaster management, of course, is a very complex issue that's being looked at. So disaster management conceptually is something which is being looked at very, very holistically. Post the, the super cyclone which impacted India in 2004, we've pretty much come a long way, and which means there is a 3-tier layer in terms of the way the government addresses it and also integrates local planning. So there is at the central federal level, where the government works at it very closely in terms of the National Disaster Management Authority, which is under the Ministry of Home Affairs of the Government of India. Then at the provincial or the state level, We have over 30 states and several union territories in India. So all of them are closely involved at a secondary level. At a tertiary level, of course, it gets into the districts, which are finally the nerve centers of the local governance, and it trickles down to local communities. So all of them eventually coalesce in terms of how the preparedness is sort of formulated, and there is a greater deal of sensitization. There's experiential learning, takeaways from the way disasters have been handled in the past, and so there is preparedness of communities towards that. Today, weather patterns, of course, are studied, and then there are these other inputs that come in. The district administrator is the one who critically drives this. So in terms of that, there is warning that's issued. So then there is evacuation if required, depending upon the category of disaster that can be expected. And then, of course, there is eventual restoration and rehabilitation that takes place. But coming to the specifics of the community approach, and you could take, for instance, I think one of classic illustration is the mangrove in Sundarbans, which is in West Bengal. So there are these stormwater surges that are
Sundarban, not Bun.
Sundarbans, yeah, okay. My bad in terms of pronunciation, but if it's a Bangla accent, it's fair enough. But be that as it may, so this is an area where it is a very fragile ecosystem, and the mangroves are getting impacted by cyclones, storm surges. There is soil erosion that takes place. As a result, there has been degradation over a period of time that's impacted communities and, more importantly, the livelihoods of people. So now the way it's been looked at in combat is, again, a public-private partnership, a community involvement, self-help groups that are set up where women tend to typically take the lead. And so what happens is there are these nurseries where, you have these plants and saplings, then they're extrapolated, brought to these fragile places, and then there is a restoration work. Concurrently, there is pisciculture, which is, the fish, which is another very critical source of livelihood there. And there is poultry farming that happens around that place. So here, there are several initiatives which have contributed to this restoration work, which is ongoing on a regular basis. The embankments are strengthened. The soil salinity is again sought to be restored. So there are programs such as MISHTI, which is an acronym, longish, and there is this integrated coastal zone management systems which come into play. There is a national climate funds that is contributing to that. So there are several elements which really go in sort of addressing and restoring this. A significant, I think, impact has been made. But I think what we need to bear in mind is that this is a recurring phenomena. What is the long-term durable solution that we can look at?
Thank you so much for this insightful sharing. And I really liked the idea. I was going to embed that in the last round of questions of a gender perspective where the women are taking the lead. And I'm sure, as you said, it's it's also inculcating and inspiring that change happening. Yeah. So I would like you to think about, for the youth here, because the room is full of young minds, while this session is about especially valuing ancient knowledge and traditions and adapting to today's threats, I would also like all of you here to think how our young generation, with whatever they have to offer, how they can be, pulled into this to become co-creators into this new climate mitigation policy, and because they are the one, as we say, to lead tomorrow and to save the planet. So jumping back to Judy, I would like to ask you, I know that in New Zealand, there have been some policies which have been adapted by government and which are embedded in what you call dynamic adaptive pathways planning. Is there anything specific you would like and you can share from this perspective? And also if you have anything where you think that the youth today can have a unique, input, and how to embed all this ancient knowledge, wisdom with what the youth today have and are looking for. I would be glad if you can share it with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Within New Zealand, one of the programs that's been really important in having adaptive planning pathways be recognized and taken up by both local and national government has been a program called the Aotearoa Circle, which is a public-private partnership, and it's made up of leaders from business, from government, not-for-profits, and the financing sector. It also includes, with the board, a rangatahi or a young person's advisory group. And so there's two things I would say that stand out about that organization. As one is it's taking leaders from within and across public and private sectors and having them put their voice and their backing and their resourcing behind the priority settings for adaptation for their sectors. But it also does two things that the board approach is the board has both in Maori and Pakeha, so non-Maori, represented on the board as co-chairs and co-development partners. But the Rangatahi Advisory Board is also really important, ensuring that the future generation's voice is heard as equally strong as those that are in the current leadership positions, because the decisions that are going to have to be made by that group in the future are going to be determined, or the conditions in which they're going to be determined are being set by those around the board table at this time. And so I think the main takeaway from that is the integration or the holistic approach of knowledge systems and timeframes was part of the design of that program. And I think that has also created a lot of trust and buy-in, which is then given the confidence to the government to pick it up.
Thank you so much. So same question for Tonga, and if you can also try to suggest how the youth can be active actors in the design of resilience adaptation efforts.
Thank you. I think as youth, the global trend right now is to be disenfranchised from our political systems because of the increasing lack of trust in institutions. And so in order for your voice to be heard, I think it's important for the youth to be informed and also to participate in your democratic right. So make your voice count and ensure that your policy makers and your decision makers and your politicians are reactive to your needs. And as people of a developing country, there is this thing called climate injustice, because our developing countries are not at fault for climate change. The industrial world, or the West, developed and became wealthy because of burning fossil fuels. And there lies the injustice. It is up to the next generation to not only come up with the solution, but also deal with the consequences in terms of adaptation. And so framing it in that way, coming from a small island developing state, we have no bearing. We can decarbonize and go net zero tomorrow and still have no bearing on what will happen to our environment, to our islands. Because of rising sea levels, we're very vulnerable. Because of ocean acidification, because of coral bleaching, our food security is at risk. Because of rising sea level, the water lens will compromise the salinity of the water that we have access to. Because of climate change, we have to become more adaptive in terms of HADR and responding to extreme climate events. From extreme weather events where we go from flooding, we can go into drought. How do we ensure food security? How do we ensure agriculture is sustained in uncertain times, especially when we don't have the facilities or the capability and resources to react properly?
Thank you. So moving on I would just move to Algis and come back. So moving on to Algis, I want to ask you, what do you think could be measures where the youth can be tapped into the local policy formulation, and even while being a voice, as the speaker mentioned, but their voice be heard, but how to ensure that their voice is not just heard and discarded, but embedded in national policy measures?
I think that youth had the same rights as adults, and there is no difference. But really, what we are doing to involve young people in business and to involve people to secure our nature and to secure mankind life. So we are doing many things. During 1 year, we have around 40 meetings with the schools, with the students from university. And one thing is, of course, to attract them to engineering specialties. But another one thing is to discuss with them, because youth, as usually they have some very interesting view. Sometimes they go out of the frame and they propose some things what you can implement. As well, we have one very interesting event. It is once a year. We call it Portaton. And Portaton, yes. And we create some tasks, and some of them they are regarding the environment issue, some of them they are regarding the business, and so on and so on. And we spread tasks everywhere, and you can join people from India as well. They can join this one Portaton, and people are working 24 hours. There are some mentors, but they are working and they propose some solutions. So really we involve people to be active, young people, and to help us to do everything what we can do best for the future.
Thank you so much. Moving on to Pierangelo, I would like to ask you, as you spoke earlier about the need to embed those ancient wisdom, is there any example of such traditional knowledge over your experience with the museums that you think deserves speedy incorporation into national policies, which has not yet been done for Italy?
But I think there are many possibilities. But I think that an important example is the protection of the traditional wooden boats, sailboats, and rowboats. With the advent of plastics and substances like fiberglass, many communities have abandoned, as Italian for first, traditional vessels to buoy boats built elsewhere with engines and other materials. Very often, modern boats pollute. Their demolition is difficult and leaves behind waste. Above all, within a short time, the common knowledge of how to build a traditional boat and how to repair it is lost, and the cost became increasingly very high. But I recall a boat, its shape, the adaptation made to meet the conditions of a specific area, be it an island, a sandy or rocky coast, is the very soul of the maritime community.
Thank you so much. Moving on to Mr. Deepak Shetty, I would like to ask you, since this panel has been exploring how to value ancient wisdom knowledge from the communities which have been at the forefront of climate change adaptation measures, and we're now talking about embedding this new generation, the voice of the youth, and being such an active person into policy with the government of India, what do you think are the converging points for this ancient wisdom to converge with what is the youth's expectation, and how to embed it into proper policy, national and or international, for proper adaptation and mitigation? With a gender perspective, if you can. Thank you.
Thank you. There are several strands or nuances to the response to this. The first upside is that India is at the cusp of a humongous demographic dividend. We are uniquely positioned where we have, possibly for the next 3 to 4 decades, a young population, which is, I wouldn't say skilled completely, but semi-skilled and possibly less skilled, which is now emerging into the workforce, is raring to go, so to speak. And that's where you need to look at the heartlands, the hinterlands, and the rural areas where you can tap into the young minds, so to speak. So far, the asymmetry in the approach on the part of the government from the policy framers' perspective was to have a top-down approach to planning, which is very, very skewed, which is completely counterproductive. Now, there is a belated recognition and realization that that's regressive. You need to have possibly a look at a more, bottom-up approach where you integrate the rural communities either through self-help groups or you have cooperative mechanisms, so to speak, where you involve the local knowledge, the traditional wisdom that's been handed over from generations. I'll just give you one illustration. You have the fishing communities, which are the backbone. Just to give you the sheer numbers, there are about 28 million fishers, fish farmers, and fish workers in India, of whom 12 million, incidentally, are women out of that. Now, they're scattered all over the country. Now, the younger the youth which were involved in fishing, traditionally and historically, the government of India has opened up a new avenue to enable them to transition, if they wish to, with some kind of a upskilling, into what we call as the NCV area, near coastal voyage, NCV, where you can move into a slightly more sophisticated than from a primary fishing craft to a vessel which can navigate in the coastal waters and get into dealing with commodities on a slightly enlarged scale. So there are bridge courses that have been designed by the Office of the Director General of Shipping of the Government of India to enable the youth to transition. So one way is that we recognize that here is a repository of humongous traditional and local knowledge. Why don't we look at, instead of uprooting them into areas which are completely alien to them, enable them to survive in the same environment, but then upskill themselves into a slightly bigger craft where they can deal with merchandise up and down, upstream and downstream.
Okay, thank you so much for this. I hope the audience has been enjoying the session. And if they have any questions, now is the time. We will now open the floor to questions. We have a moving mic somewhere. So if you have any questions to any of the panelists, just raise your hand.
Good evening, panelists. Good evening, moderator. My name is Shlo Gupta. And my question is addressed to Mr. Deepak Shetty because of your prior work in policy making with the government of India, right? Now, when we're talking about incorporating local communities into addressing the environmental issue, the way I see it, there are two main ways you could do it. First one would be decentralization by dispersing more power to the most local levels of governance that you can think of and letting them do the work based on ancient knowledge, traditional knowledge like we talked about, right? Secondly, it would be through privatization if you were to lead to more data collection and then using stuff like AI and ML to address and figure out how you can apply that to local levels. My question to you, sir, is what the pros and cons of these approaches are and how well they can be incorporated into the actual policy making in India or other countries as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I did allude to in my response earlier that rather better late than never, there is a recognition and a realization on the part of the government of India that it is about time, that there has to be devolution of powers, decentralization, have the local communities involved, which means from a district planning, you get into village planning levels, right down at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, involve the local communities either through self-help groups or you have cooperative mechanisms that are getting promoted, not necessarily privatization. Not too sure whether that's an optimal route to adopt, but and one of the key pivots is exactly what you alluded to, is trying to leverage technology. And that's being encouraged very significantly. Just to give you an instance, there was an announcement in today's Economic Times, I don't know whether you read that, the Minister for Cooperation and Home Affairs made an announcement that, for the fishing communities, now the deep sea fishing trawlers are being made available, a few to begin with, but over a gradual period of time, there are going to be a large number of such deployments which are going to be handed out to the communities locally, which have the capability to, transition to sea for 25 days at one go and have a fish catch of up to 20 metric tons. So we are talking of, and this is again through a cooperative mechanism. So there are initiatives but I don't think they've attained critical mass as yet, given the sheer scale of our villages, it's a tall ask, but hopefully this is a beginning. We'll get there sooner than later.
Thank you so much. We'll move to the next question. I would ask you if you can make your questions simpler and so introduce and question, and then the answers as well, if you can be directly to the point. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the esteemed panel. I'm Shrishti Shastri, a law student. My question is to the entire panel. As to all the speakers spoke about how the communities possess these knowledge. However, these communities that are the coastal communities continue to be marginalized. So what are the barriers that are stopping them, that the traditional ecological knowledge that they possess, from being recognized in adaptation decisions in a way that it empowers the communities as well? And how do we overcome them?
Thank you. Anyone who wants to respond and go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. I mentioned just briefly, I think having coordination on the community level first and understanding the purpose and priorities within that community is also really important, so that when there are opportunities for engagement at higher levels and with other regions, that it's coordinated. And I'm happy to give you some really specific examples later if you'd like to catch me.
Thank you.
If I may just quickly supplement, I would echo what Mr. Sundar said. There is a sense of disquiet and distrust because so far they've all been marginalized. There was no involvement, there was no inclusivity in the entire planning and execution process. So once we address that core issue of quelling the distrust, getting them engaged and giving them an assurance that the government is there to handhold and for the long haul, and this is not just a tokenism or just sort of, a SOPs, then that's the way to go forward. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. We'll just take the two questions together and then the panelists can reply.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Cherish Raj Purohit. I'm a researcher working at the intersection of traditional knowledge systems and public policy. My question, sir, is what ethical safeguards are needed to prevent appropriation of indigenous knowledge systems when used in global climate policy frameworks? And this one to you, sir, Deepak sir, I really request you to take this. Do you think redirecting global financing for climate adaptation toward community-driven projects instead of top-down interventions like you mentioned will help? And what would be feasible ways to go about it?
Thank you. We'll just take the second question as well.
Very good evening to the esteemed panelists. Thank you very much for such an insightful session. Myself, Gunja Shandal, and I'm a student of history. And as you guys were talking about preserving the ancient technologies, I believe history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And my question is, how does India's knowledge of local ecology and climate adaptation strategies, how will they help India to position itself as a global leader in climate adaptation narratives in the South, so that we can make sure that yesterday's history rhymes with today's technological innovations? And it's an open question, anybody can answer it from the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. We had the speaker of Tonga who wanted to bounce back on something, and then.
Yeah, it was just about the third to last question. I think as a local community member, you need to take agency. And there are certain windows of opportunity or doors that you can knock on to get what you want for your local community. So you need to find out what those pathways and entryways are, whether it's through your local member of parliament or through your regional representative, or I'm not too sure of the government system here in India, but I'm sure that there are official pathways beyond the assistance. So don't wait for the government to implement a project. You can be proactive. So I think that's the what I want to advise. Yeah.
Thank you. I just moved to Mr. Shetty to reply the questions, and we'll see if anyone else has time to.
This is specific to the nuance that you brought in about international financing. Now, there is a certain skepticism in terms of the government. I don't want to get into that discourse, but usually international funding and finance, it has to fit within the overall national policies per se. For example, you have the FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act of 2012, which is deemed to be somewhat draconian, which sort of disallows foreign funding to come in through an open door policy. It is subject to all the caveats that need to be complied with and fulfilled. International financing is typically funneled through governments at the end of the day. Because let's say if it's a multilateral financing through ADB, Asian Development Fund or the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank, etc. Those are all channeled through the government agencies, and then it trickles down. I don't recall, I mean, unless there is grants and, aid that is available, that again is usually, the local administration is taken on board and then approval sought before it is funded, because this has to sort of integrate into the national objective, because you cannot have some extraneous elements coming in I don't want to sound very, very pejorative here, with ulterior agenda. So that's a whole filter that the government wants to look
I
at.
would ask you if you can also, in 1 minute, answer the last question, because our time is
Okay,
up.
sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies. I lost the train of thought. If you can just very quickly recap. You said if I recall,
Yeah.
it was involving the local communities.
Yeah, so basically, how is the knowledge, the ancient knowledge of local communities, going to help India position itself as a global leader in the South, especially when it comes to climate leadership narratives, because it's very important for us in the contemporary world?
There's absolutely no two opinions of the fact that today, if you're looking at holistic, cohesive development, then you need to have all forms of knowledge getting fused or funneled into a decision-making process, which can get escalated. But there are levels at which it'll have to be sort of looked at. And then I'm sure the government is not just confining knowledge repositories to, designated institutes, national centers of excellence, but clearly the local and the community knowledge as well. But how that is stitched up in terms of an overall framework, yes, but there are challenges. For example, if you look at traditional knowledge, is there an IPR impact, intellectual property right impact there? Is that dimension needs to be secured or not? Those need closer analysis.
Thank
But
you.
suffice to say that it'll be taken on board.
Thank you. But I would welcome any more questions to the panelists after this session. And please feel free to speak to our panelists afterwards. And I'm sure our esteemed panelists will have a lot to share. So thank you very much for this very amazing and insightful session.
Thank you very much. Thank you.